Well, thanks, Rex. It's a pleasure to be here. And I've been charged with looking at the High Plains Aquifer from the Kansas perspective. So here we have the state of Kansas taken out of the High Plains. The tan area in this inset there is the High Plains Aquifer in Kansas. Now, as Bill indicated in his presentation, this is a very important resource to us. In terms of the daily water use in the state, about 70% of the water used on a daily basis in the state of Kansas is groundwater from the High Plains Aquifer. In terms of irrigation water, over 90% of the water used for irrigation in the state of Kansas is groundwater from the High Plains Aquifer. We are currently heavily utilizing this aquifer, but that's nothing new. We've been doing that for decades. And so a price has been paid in terms of aquifer conditions. And I just want to illustrate it here. And this is just a portion of the state. You can see over here in this inset, the shaded portion of the state is shown here, emphasizing the High Plains, which is the outlined area here, the High Plains Aquifer. What we've got here is a map of the percent change in saturated thickness or aquifer thickness since pre-development, since the onset of widespread pumping for irrigation in western Kansas, central and western Kansas, the date about 1950. Now on this map, blue indicates aquifer thickness increases. All the other colors indicate decreases of varying percentages. These blues that you see in the western third of the state, if I can get this right, here, down here, don't attribute any significance to those. Those are areas of very thin saturated thickness at the time of pre-development, so they're not of economic significance. Now, when you look at this map, you can see that there are two tales to tell about this High Plains Aquifer in the state of Kansas. In the south central extension of the aquifer in the state, you've got mainly yellows and blues. So although this area has been heavily utilized, it's subhumid in climate, and so it's been able to withstand that development reasonably well. Now, as you go west into the semi-arid portions of the state, you can see that the story changes. The colors are now predominantly oranges and blues. So clearly, the development in this area has had a heavy impact on aquifer conditions. The deepest reds here are over 60% of the original aquifer thickness is gone, okay? Now, this has prompted a great deal of concern, not just in the state of Kansas, but beyond, because of the importance of the agricultural production supported by the groundwaters from the High Plains Aquifer in this area. So we get a lot of questions at the Kansas Geological Survey, at the KGS, about what the future holds for this aquifer. What can we do to moderate the rate of decline? Is it possible that we can stabilize the water levels in those areas that are so heavily impacted? Now, to address those issues, we have to have data. And what I thought I'd talk about here today are the data sets that we have in Kansas and the insights that we can glean from them about conditions in the aquifer and what the future may hold for us. So we've got one type of data that is incredibly important for us in terms of assessing the future of an aquifer, and that is how the aquifer has responded to past development and how have water levels changed through time. And we've got a couple of ways of looking at this. Depends on the scale, the temporal and spatial scale. So I'm going to start off small and talk about some of the insights we can get from the scale of a single well, looking at the water level responses in that well to nearby pumping activity, and then we're going to move upward in both space and time. So in Kansas, beginning, I guess, in 2007, we set up this network of monitoring wells, basically continuous wells, monitoring water levels continuously through time. We've got an integrated pressure transducer data logger. In the water column, every hour it takes a measure of the pressure exerted by the overlying column of water, stores it in an internal data logger, and when the wells are equipped with telemetry, as this well is, sends it off to a publicly accessible website at the Kansas Geological Survey. so that groundwater can be more visible to the citizens of the state. And this has proven to be a very popular program for us. And over time, we've expanded this program now to over 20 wells with continuous recorders. Well over half of them are accessible via telemetry. The others are downloaded quarterly and put on the web. The squares and the polygons shown here are areas where we have more than one well in that area, and the others are just single wells. We're going to put a new well here in northwest Kansas next month. The idea is we're trying to get a feel for how the aquifer responds to pumping in these areas. And I'm just going to give you an example. Going to southern Thomas County, northwest Kansas, and I'm just going to show you 9 years of hourly water level records from that well. What we've got here is on the y-axis, that's elevation of the water level in meters. We're going metric here, okay? You know, we're not joining with Myanmar and Liberia. Okay, on the x-axis, we've got time, 9 years of time. Black line is the record from this continuous water level sensor, this integrated pressure transducer data logger unit. The circles and diamonds are manual measurements done to make sure that the electronic instrumentation is working well. The thick black line you see there is not a product of sensor electronics noise. That's actually water level responses to changes in barometric pressure. Now, what I wanted to call your attention to, two aspects of this plot. First, you can see the clear pattern year after year, water level declines during the irrigation season, recovery during the winter. But notice that first 3 to 4 years, the water levels are basically bouncing around the same value. Then we have 3 years of more intensive use during drought conditions, and then we return to water levels bouncing around basically a stable value. Now, this surprised us because that indicates that there's more water in play here. There's more water is flowing into the system than we had anticipated. And that we're not that far away from having a system that is close to sustainable in this area. Now, this is just the results of one well. And the question is, are these conclusions, these insights that we gleaned from this record, do they just pertain to the area immediately around that well, or are they more general in scope? To get at that, we're going to turn to a different water level data set. Instead of working with hourly data, we're going to work with annual data, okay? And this is a program that many of the states in the High Plains Aquifer have, that every January we go out and measure water levels across a network of 1,400 wells in the High Plains Aquifer. We do it in January because it's 3 to 4 months after cessation of irrigation pumping. So it's not going to be the temporal variations in the irrigation season will not have a large impact on these measurements. We've done this for decades, we being the Kansas Water Resources community, the Kansas Geological Survey, the Division of Water Resources of the Kansas Department of Agriculture, and earlier the USGS. Great data set. However, this is just the response element of an excitation-response relationship. We need the excitation that's driving these water level changes. We need, as Bill indicated in his presentation, we need information about water use. Now in Kansas, we've got water rights. Every non-domestic well in the state has to have a water right, and now has to have a totalizing flow meter. Now that process, shifting over to totalizing flow meters, has taken time. As of a USDA did a survey as of 2013, over 89% of the wells, irrigation wells in the state of Kansas, have totalizing flow meters, has to be reported annually. And now we recognize human behavior, people are going to cheat. So the regulatory agency has a legal authority to go onto your land and make sure that your meter's working properly. And that helps reduce the incentive to cheat because you can lose your water right if it's found to be particularly egregious. So we have this data set. And I should say in the US, we're about 28% of irrigation wells have metered. We need to do a better job in figuring out how much water we're using within this country, because that's how we're going to be able to manage our resources in a more appropriate fashion. Okay, we've got this water level, annual water level data. We have these annual water use data. How can we use this to assess if those insights we glean from an individual well are more general in character? Well, we came up with a method here in the last couple of years at the KGS, a method for assessing the prospects of an aquifer sustainability using these two data sets. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to apply it here to the groundwater management districts. We have 5 groundwater management districts overlying the High Plains Aquifer in Kansas. I should back up and say we have one state water agency. We consider surface water, groundwater as one integrated whole. We don't separate them out. Okay, one integrated whole. These groundwater management districts are a means of injecting a dose of local input into the management of the resources. So they work with the state agency. They can come up with their own initiatives, but at the end of the day, those initiatives have to fit within the framework of Kansas water law and have to be approved by the state water agency. We're going to work with these groundwater management districts. This sustainability assessment approach, very simple, water balance approach. We take the water volume change over a certain area. We say that's it got to be equal to everything flowing in minus everything flowing out. We can simplify that, and we can rewrite the right-hand side and say it's equal to net inflow minus pumping. Net inflow is everything flowing in minus pumping. Everything flowing in minus everything flowing out except for pumping. And that net inflow term is the same as the capture component that Bill talked about in his talk. And you can see its importance for assessing aquifer sustainability. Stable water levels, left-hand side is 0. Pumping equals net inflow, or pumping equals the capture component. How do we get at pumping? How do we get at net inflow? Well, we get at the net inflow using an approach we developed, and we'll apply it here to Northwest Kansas. We take the 188 wells that were measured every year from 96 to 2000, well, to present, and we take the average water level change each year. We take the annual water use each year. We plot them against each other. According to the theory we developed, they should fit on a straight line. And from the slope and intercept of that line, you can get that net inflow component. And I'm just going to demonstrate that. Here, left-hand side, we got the average annual water level change in meters versus annual water use, 10 to the 9th cubic meters. These are all the years. And you can see, and just each year, each point is a different year, just a few scattered years there, basically a linear arrangement. From this, we can take slope and intercept. We can calculate the pumping that would produce stable water levels in this area. But what I'm going to do is a graphical demonstration and show how much reduction from the average water use is required to get stable water levels. Average water use over this period, 0.53, 10 to the 9th cubic meters. That's produced an average response of 18 centimeters decline across the aquifer, over 3.5 meters lost in this 20 years, 96 to present. We don't have that many 3.5 meter increments to lose. So how do we get to stable water levels? We slide up that line. It comes out 23% reduction in average annual water use will lead to stable water levels across this area. In other words, from 96 to present, if they had pumped 23% less than actual, the average water level change over this area would have been 0. So this is practically feasible through precision ag, through crop mixes. 23% reduction is possible. But what are the management vehicles we have to get that reduction? Well, there's 2 that we've developed in the state of Kansas since 2012. We have this Local Enhanced Management Area, or LEMA. Basically, the idea here is a bunch of irrigators get together. They say, we want to cut water use by a certain percent. They vote for it in that area. Majority rules. If it passes, everybody in that area has to follow suit. The regulatory agency comes in and makes sure everybody's playing by those rules. We have one of those set up in northwestern Kansas, been going for 4 years now, 99 square mile area. They've reduced 20% of their average annual water use, and the results look very promising, leading to the entire district deciding to go this route. Just 2 weeks ago, about a 7% reduction is what they're getting started with. But the idea here is we now have a vehicle that people can use to implement these reductions. Water conservation areas, another similar tool that I'm not going to describe here in the interest of time. I'd be happy to take questions about it. But the bottom line is, we've got a chance here to make a real difference with water reductions. So we've applied the sustainability assessment approach across the groundwater management districts in Kansas. In south central subhuman Kansas, reductions of a few to several percent will lead to stable water levels under current climatic conditions. As we go west, the task becomes more arduous, from the low to mid-20s in northwest Kansas down to the mid-30s in southwest Kansas. But the bottom line here is these reductions, let me rephrase that, practically feasible reductions can make a very significant impact here in the state of Kansas in terms of conditions in the High Plains Aquifer. But in order to implement these types of reductions, we have got to have the data so that folks have confidence that they're going to produce the projected amount. So we need to emphasize data collection in our efforts as a community if we're going to make a difference. And speaking of data, Kansas, High Plains Aquifer Atlas. I used to have refrigerator magnets. I've run out, but if you want one, send me an email and I'll try to dig one up. So we have a data set, a data page here on the Kansas Geological Survey website for all sorts of information on the High Plains Aquifer in the state. And finally, acknowledge some funding sources. And with that, I'm going to bring it to close. I'm happy to take some questions. Thank you.